So again, we are here today at the Alameda County Budget Forum hosted by my office, District 5. And the purpose of this webinar is to provide an overview of the Alameda County budget, to share our budget priorities and how you can get involved in the budget process. We'll also hear from John Lindsay Poland from the American Friends Services Committee's California Healing Justice Program to provide a deeper dive on the public budget, public protection budget. And we hope that you will walk away from today's webinar with a greater understanding of what the county budget supports, the budget process, and how you can get involved. Next slide. So here's our agenda for today. Again, we'll go through our budget priorities. Next, we'll talk about the state and federal impacts to our county budget. And then Agnes is going to do a deep dive into our Alameda County budget with an overview. And then from there, John Lindsay Poland is going to do a deep dive into our public protection budget. I'll talk briefly about the budget process and timeline, and we'll have time towards the end of this for questions and answers. Next slide. Okay, so many of you have heard that our budget is a reflection of our values as well as our priorities. So for Alameda County, our annual budget is $6.1 billion. And we're on an annual budget cycle. We adopt our budget every year. I came from the Oakland City Council where we had a biennial or a budget adoption every 2 years. There's no specific mandated public engagement process outside our board meetings and our work sessions. And so that's why I'm engaging in this budget forum. I want to sort of take our County Board of Supervisors into the community to get you all engaged. Coming from Oakland, we actually had a fiscal policy that mandated doing budget forums out in every single council district, as well as a very firm timeline for our budget process. And I am hoping over the course of my engagement with our board, we'll be able to continue to strengthen our public engagement. Secondly, we want to share with you that Alameda County provides funding for critical services that we all rely on. These are safety net services. This includes healthcare and behavioral health, homelessness services and affordable housing, and also social services like food assistance, child welfare, senior services, and of course, public safety. One of the things that you'll hear about today is that we are very reliant on state and federal funding, as well as being impacted by current policies. 60% of our budget is from state and federal sources. Next slide. So my top priority in terms of our budget is to ensure that we maintain our safety net amid federal and state budget cuts and policy changes. We want healthcare for those who will lose Medi-Cal benefits, including undocumented immigrants. We want to ensure mental health services, including prevention and early intervention services. We want to ensure food security given the increased need now more than ever. We want to continue supporting affordable housing and homelessness solutions. I want to support Care First, Jails Last programs and services in the community, and you'll hear a bit more about that later. And then now is really an important time to protect our most vulnerable populations. That includes immigrants and refugees, children, foster youth, seniors, those with serious mental illness, our unhoused community, as well as justice-involved individuals. Now, it's unlikely that we'll be able to backfill all of the cuts that we are faced with, but we have to do everything possible to strengthen our safety net and provide these important services. Secondly, budget transparency is very important to me. One of our county values is transparency and accountability achieved through open communications and involvement of diverse voices. So as stewards of our public resources and social safety net, it's important to ensure that our board, Alameda County stakeholders, and members of the public receive timely information and have ample opportunity to meaningfully participate in our annual budget process. Last year was my first year in office, and I wrote a budget memo with some recommendations that I got from engaging many of you in the community. One of them was more public noticing. This means more time to review our budget documents and to provide input. Legally, we have 72 hours noticing for regular meetings and 24 hours for special meetings. I would like to see 10 days noticing and to also make sure that our budget documents are online and accessible to the public. I'd also like to see more community engagement, additional opportunities to participate in our budget process, including meetings in the evenings after work hours, not only during the day when we usually meet. And then I also want to see more fiscal transparency. Last year, I asked our auditor to review the reserves that we have and the fund balances because it definitely is more than a rainy day, and it's potentially time for us to understand how we can tap into those reserves. Next slide. So, despite being in a very challenging political environment with this federal administration, we were able to achieve some real wins last year. Again, my first year in office. And I want to really thank all of you for participating in the forums, community meetings, board meetings, talking with my staff one-on-one. All of that is creating collaborative governance. It's allowing us to really advocate together. And so we already won something in terms of our budget process, which is that the county administrator has committed to publish the proposed county budget 2 weeks earlier. So it's going to be published by the end of May, and that will give the board and the public more time to engage in this process. So instead of what has been just a 2-week process to review and engage in our budget process, we'll have a month. Secondly, I created a committee last year called Alameda County Together for All, which I chair, and that committee has been charged with looking at the impacts of the federal administration. So together, we've been able to advocate to defend and protect our most vulnerable communities. We've secured $7.5 million for immigrant and refugee rapid response, deportation defense, community organizing, and we're also working to establish an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. Earlier this year, we also approved an ice-free zones policy. I also wanted to measure a couple tax measures that are really important. Measure W is our general sales tax. Through the advocacy that we did together last year, we were able to commit 80% of the funds, or $1.4 billion, towards homelessness solutions. We also set aside $258 million in Measure W funds for essential county services. And those funds are already helping to support healthcare, mental health care, services for seniors, children, the LGBTQ community, and we secured $16.5 million for food security. Lastly, Measure C is a dedicated tax for early childhood education and care, and we adopted a $1 billion 5-year plan with those funds to improve our child care system for children ages 0 to 5, for families as well as providers. Next slide. So some of you might have heard about H.R. 1. H.R. 1 is the federal budget bill that was signed by Trump on July 4th of last year. And this is going to transfer wealth from those who need it in terms of the services being provided to the riches. So over the next 10 years, the richest 1% will get $1 trillion in tax breaks, while our most vulnerable are going to be stripped away of $930 billion in Medicaid funding. Now, this is an obscene corporate giveaway. It's a massive transfer of wealth from working people who rely on Medicaid and other core safety net services to billionaires through tax breaks. I wanted to also mention that at my request, the Board of Supervisors is officially supporting the billionaires tax, and they are gathering signatures to place this measure on the November ballot. That would be an emergency one-time wealth tax of 5% that's focused on individuals with over $1 billion in assets. And if they succeed in placing it on the ballot in November and it's passed by voters, it would raise approximately $100 billion to help fund healthcare and public education. Next slide. So there are some federal impacts to our budget that are unlike anything that we have that are unlike anything that we have seen in decades. HR 1 is going to establish new work and community engagement requirements for Medi-Cal and CalFresh recipients. So nearly 160,000 Alameda County residents who are subject to work requirements could lose Medi-Cal coverage. Nearly 40,000 CalFresh recipients may lose food benefits. There's also an unfunded mandate because county staff will need to implement the new work requirements and determine eligibility, which will increase their workload. And there's no federal or state funding for county staff to meet that increased workload. With HR 1 and these federal impacts, immigrants are especially vulnerable to losing access due to changes in federal definitions of qualified immigrants. For example, over 5,000 immigrants and refugees are already losing access to CalFresh, which started in April 1st. And over 8,000, almost 9,000 immigrants will lose access to Medi-Cal starting October of this year. So our healthcare providers, meaning our public hospitals and community clinics, face significant reductions in funding and will see increased uncompensated care as people lose their healthcare coverage. Some of you may have heard that the county has a mandate to provide indigent care. That means providing health care to the lowest income residents who lose Medi-Cal coverage. This is through our Health Pack program, and there will be increased demand for Health Pack because more of the county general fund may have to go towards shoring up that access for the most vulnerable who will be losing it. And lastly, there are additional changes and regulations to federal agencies that will impact funding levels and access to housing, homelessness, and health programs. Next slide. So we're also seeing impacts on Alameda County from the state. The 25-26 state budget instituted a Medi-Cal enrollment freeze on individuals with unsatisfactory immigration status, including undocumented individuals. And almost 50,000 Alameda County residents with unsatisfactory immigration status are enrolled in Medi-Cal, which means if they lose their health care coverage, they won't be able to sign up again. In addition, California's Proposition 1 shifts the state's Mental Health Services Act to a new Behavioral Health Services Act, changing how that funding can be used. So for Alameda County, that means that this transition results in approximately $75 million in reduced behavioral health funding. Now, the county is working to identify a way to bridge some of that funding gap, but it still faces more than $50 million in cuts to our service providers. And the greatest impact is on prevention and early intervention programs. Now, these programs are often low barrier and culturally responsive, helping residents before they reach crisis. Next slide. So what does this mean for Alameda County? Attacks on our safety net will hit our most vulnerable residents the hardest. As people lose health coverage, they delay care, leading to more preventable emergencies and increased reliance on emergency room. At the same time, our healthcare system is facing growing financial strain. Public hospitals and community clinics, which serve low-income residents, will see rising uncompensated care as coverage declines. An Alameda Health System, which includes Highland Hospital, projects a $100 million deficit next year. Our health clinics, our federally qualified health centers are also facing higher costs and reduced revenue, and the result will be longer wait times and reduced access to critical care. We are also seeing increased food insecurity as residents lose access to CalFresh benefits. So all of this means that we are entering a budget year that will require difficult choices, and we will need your public input more than ever. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so in terms of closing our budget gap, this slide shows you how we have closed the budget gap since 2017. So you'll see that last year we had one of our largest budget gaps. It was $105 million. That was incredibly significant. Now, we've been able in the past to close our budget being very creative with ongoing or one-time funding and without having to have any layoffs or major cuts to services. This year, we anticipate our budget gap is going to be compounded by the impacts of HR 1 and Prop 1. Our staff is working to figure out what that budget gap will be and how to balance it, but we are bracing for a pretty challenging budget cycle. So I hope all of that was helpful. And at this point, I want to hand it off to Agnes Cho, who is our District 5 Senior Policy Analyst, and she's going to give an overview of the Alameda County budget. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Agnes.
Thank you, Nikki. So again, thank you everyone for spending your evening with us to attend this forum to learn more about the county budget. This section I'll be providing a very brief overview of the county budget, as well as the key departments, programs, and services that our budget funds. Our budget last year, this current fiscal year, 2025 and 2026, was a little over $6.1 billion. What we're interested in is the general fund, which was about $4.3 billion, which is the main operating fund that supports the core services and programs that the nearly 1.6 million Alameda County residents depend on every day. The general fund is also the most discretionary, where the Board of Supervisors and county staff can make key funding decisions. And the other remaining funds that make up the $6.1 billion include special funds for capital projects, internal services, fire, flood control, and county service area. But we'll be really focusing our attention on this $4.3 million in the general fund today. So where does the revenue for that $4.3 billion from the general fund come from? Like Supervisor Fortunato Bas mentioned earlier, the county is highly dependent on state and federal aid. And more than 60% of the county's general fund comes from state and federal sources and grants. Another big revenue source for the county is property taxes, which makes up about 15% of the county's budget. Alameda County actually receives 15 cents for every dollar that the county collects in property tax. We also have some local funding measures, largely special and general sales taxes. There are three up on this slide that you may have heard of. Measure A is a healthcare sales tax that was originally passed by the voters in 2004. It was renewed in 2014 and is set to expire in 2034. And it goes to supporting our public hospitals, Alameda Health System, and the remaining kind of 25% is allocated by the Board of Supervisors for community-based organizations providing healthcare. We also have Measure C, which is a special sales tax that was passed by voters in 2020 and is set to expire in 2040. 80% of Measure C goes toward childcare, preschool, and early education for children ages 0 to 5. And about 20% goes toward pediatric healthcare for the Benioff Children's Hospital in Oakland. Finally, we have Measure W. Measure W, unlike the other two measures, is a general sales tax. It was approved by the voters in 2020, expires in 2030. And the appropriation of Measure W as a general sales tax is actually outside of the general budget cycle, so it's not included in the calculation for this budget. And that's because as a general sales tax, the Board of Supervisors has a lot of discretion over how to allocate it. Many of you joined us in our Measure W advocacy last year, where the Board of Supervisors voted in July to dedicate 80% of Measure W for homelessness solutions. So $1.4 billion will go toward the Home Together Fund, and 20% will go towards the Essential County Services Fund. So again, Measure W dollars are not included in the Maintenance of Effort County budget. Through the county budget, the county provides programs and services that for social safety net in four main service areas. These service areas include healthcare, public assistance, public protection, and general government. We'll be providing a very brief overview of each of these service areas, their budgets, and kind of the core responsibilities for each of these areas. So the first is healthcare, which kind of funds critical healthcare services, funds community clinics, behavioral health programs, and public health initiatives, with the focus on serving the lowest income and uninsured residents. With public assistance, the county provides safety net supports and programs that help residents meet their very basic needs and stay stable. So it gets people access to public benefits like Medi-Cal or CalFresh or SSI, general assistance. It also runs programs for foster youth, seniors, immigrants, and refugees. We also have public protection. Which supports and promotes public safety through the sheriff's, VA, public defender, probation, and fire. They also provide investments in reentry programs. And finally, the last service area is general government, which really are all of the departments that help keep the county operations running. The county also serves as the local government for residents in the unincorporated area. There are about 150,000 people that live in unincorporated Alameda County. And for those folks, the county is the local government and provides municipal services. So the majority of the county's budget this past fiscal year was allocated to three of the four service areas, so healthcare, public protection, and public assistance, and this accounted for over 83% of the total budget. Currently, the county staff is in the process of calculating their maintenance of effort budget, which is a process they go through each year to determine what it will cost to provide the same level of services as the prior year. So each agency recently submitted their preliminary maintenance of effort budget, or MOE budget. And there was a board work session last Tuesday where they presented the MOE budget. Now I'm going to provide a very brief overview of each of the core service areas and their proposed MOE budget their preliminary MOE budget for this coming fiscal year. The first service area is healthcare, operated by the agency Alameda County Health, or AC Health. AC Health is comprised of four departments: behavioral health, public health, environmental health, and the Office of the Agency Director. And the Office of the Agency Director is where cross-agency programs like housing and homelessness and health packs sit. Here you can see the appropriations by each department. The largest department in AC Health is the Behavioral Health Department. The total agency is projecting a budget of about $1.369 billion, and behavioral health accounts for kind of nearly 60% of that budget. The behavioral health is also facing deep budget cuts, like Supervisor Fortunato Bas mentioned, due to the Proposition 1 in the State Behavioral Health Services Act transition. You'll also see that the Office of the Agency Director's budget is about a quarter of the agency's budget, and that's because it includes pretty large cross-agency programs like homelessness, which includes an investment of about $124 million, not including Measure W funds, and about $85 million for Health Pack. So where does this funding come from? Oh, 57% of Alameda AC Health's agency budget comes from federal and state sources. So state aid is the largest source, and sources include MHSA or now BHSA and realignment. You'll also see kind of a large amount comes from charges for services, 28%, and 3/4 of the charges for services is actually for Medi-Cal billing to the state, and as well as charges for CalAIM services. Other funding sources that AC Health pulls from is the Tobacco Master Settlement Fund, the Alameda Health System, the non-hospital portion of Measure A, and pediatric services from Measure C. So Alameda County Health is actually committed to making pretty important investments this coming budget year in services that really impact all of us. So this includes, like I mentioned previously, $124 million investment in housing and homelessness services, not included the additional investments that will be made through Measure W, as well as $85 million for Health Pack, and implementing the care court, implementing our electronic health records system, the EPIC system. And really, AC Health can't do this alone. They're very reliant on partnerships with our community providers. So they have 408 contracts with nearly 200 organizations for about $800 million. So really reliant on our community providers. And as HR 1 and kind of the state policy and budget cuts really impact healthcare access, kind of AC Health is one of the agencies kind of in the center of the county's response to state and federal impacts. The second service area is public assistance. This is operated by the Social Services Agency. The Social Services Agency, or SSA for short, has 3 core departments. The first is Workforce and Benefits Administration that manages kind of the public benefits program and really help people become eligible, to determine eligibility and support them in accessing their benefits. We have Adult and Aging Services, which provides programs for our seniors, people with disabilities, and the medically frail. And finally, their last department is for Children and Family Services, really focused on child protection, serving kind of foster youth, adoptions, and preventing child abuse in families. SSA's budget that they project for the next fiscal year is about $1.1 billion. And this chart shows kind of how that budget is broken down by department. I think one thing to note that you won't see in this chart is that the largest category of SSA's expenditures of that $1.1 billion, about 42% of that goes directly into direct benefits that they issue to clients. So it goes straight into people's wallets. And about 1/3 of SSA's budget is actually dedicated to salaries for staff like eligibility workers who work with our residents to determine eligibility for benefits. And one thing, so this chart shows kind of where SSA's funding comes from, and SSA, more than any other agency, is highly dependent on state and federal aid for its revenue. As you can see in this chart, 98% of SSA's funding actually comes from state and federal sources. So similar to AC Health, SSA can't do this alone. They're really dependent and on partnerships with community organizations. They have 218 contracts with CBOs for over $130 million. And some examples of the services and programs that our CBO partners provide include emergency food, emergency shelter, senior services, and immigrant and refugee services, just to name a few. One of the challenges that really impacts SSA's ability to provide kind of the high level of services is their staffing vacancies. In the last MOE budget work session with the Board of Supervisors, SSA shared that their vacancy rate for their various departments is over 20%. So this is a huge challenge that we need to focus on. And SSA is directly impacted, like AC Health, by HR 1. So there are many eligibility and administrative changes that are part of HR 1. And this will significantly increase the workload that SSA is responsible for. We are also seeing, as a result of HR 1, kind of a decrease in benefits, especially CalFresh benefits, which will mean both less assistance to people, but also higher costs to the county. The third service area is public protection. There are 5 departments that make up the public protection service areas and provide public protection services. The sheriff's office, which oversees the jails and provides law enforcement. The probation department, which provides probation services, community supervision, reentry, and juvenile services and detention. The fire department provides fire protection and 911 dispatch services to many areas of the county. The district attorney's office, which is our public prosecutor, and the public defender's office, which is our defense attorney. Here we have kind of just an overview of the appropriations in their preliminary fiscal year 26-27 and the lead budget. You can see by the size, the sheriff's office is the largest department by budget, with a budget of about preliminary budget of about $678 million. And that's followed by kind of fire and probation with about $240 million in their budget. The revenue that these departments bring in are largely from state and federal grants, as well as charges for services that they provide and tax revenue. But what you can see from this chart in that middle row is that the revenue that most of these departments bring in is not nearly enough to cover their entire expenses, and that many of these departments are reliant on the county general fund, which is represented in the net county cost in that bottom row. The net county cost is how much the county needs to fund the departments from the general fund after all the external revenue sources are accounted for. One thing to note is that the fire department is the only department on public protection that does not receive general funds from the county, and instead collects all of its revenue from service charges, special taxes, and grants. Now, just if you sum up the net county costs that each of these departments, the public protection departments are estimating for this coming fiscal year's budget, it amounts to over $850 million from the county. I just want to compare that with the net county cost from AC Health, which is at $203 million, and from SSA that has a net county cost of $80 million. So this provides a snapshot of the sheriff's office's preliminary budget as the largest public protection department. So detention and corrections is where the sheriff's budget, where the majority of the sheriff's budget is allocated. The sheriff runs Santa Rita Jail, which is the 3rd largest jail in California, and there are a lot of contracts that are required to operate the jail, as well as high-cost capital projects that are required. And finally, the 4th service area is general government. So Alameda County, general government refers to departments that keep the county running as an organization, and provides core public services for residents in unincorporated areas. There's a list of all of the departments that make up general government is listed here. But I want to kind of highlight the largest agency by budget in the general government is the Community Development Agency, or CDA. So the CDA has a budget of nearly $82 million, and $38 million of CDA's budget is dedicated to HCD, or Housing and Community Development Department. And HCD, among other things, helps administer the county's affordable housing investments. So I think with that, that concludes kind of my, that concludes my overview of the county budget. And we're going to we're going to do a deep dive On the public protection budget with John Lindsay Poland from the American sorry about that. The American Friends Services Committee, and a member of the Care First Field Glass Community Coalition. So thank you, John, for providing this presentation.
Thank you, Agnes, and thank you, Supervisor Bas, Fortunato Bas, for organizing this town hall, and really everybody who's come at dinner time on a Wednesday evening. I'm going to dive into certain aspects of the public protection budget, particularly that as relate to the jail. If you could go to the next slide. Um, uh, so. You saw some of this information earlier. This is a pie chart showing the proportions of the general fund that are going into the public protection budget. So the fire department is an expensive department, but it is entirely funded through its own revenue source, for which the county government does not have the same kind of discretion as it does for other departments in public protection. And again, you can see that the sheriff brings up a majority of it. You can also see that the district attorney's budget at $112 million, this is this past year that we're just finishing, is considerably more than the public defender's budget, has about 150 more attorneys on its staff. Um, uh, and then the trial court also gets some funding from the county. It is, I think, really important to note what Agnes was saying about how net county costs for public protection, and particularly for the sheriff's office, make up much more of the general fund. That is what the county has control over the spending of than health services or social services. And what that means is that with the HR1 Trump administration's and Republican Congress's budget, the health services and social services are much more impacted by those federal cuts, unless the county makes some significant adjustments to the public protection budget as well, because the public protection budget really comes from county revenues mostly. If we could go to the next slide as well. Um, so we are coming into budget season. Supervisor Fortunato Bas laid out some of the schedule for that. We'll see more of that soon. But there are certain decisions about the county spending that happen outside of that annual budget process. And one of them that is very important is capital projects. So these are for county-owned property or infrastructure, including renovations, major upgrades. The revenue for those capital improvement projects comes from a percentage of the general fund. That is what the county supervisors have discretion over or decision-making power over, and unspent funds from county departments, which are generally not so visible in the information that's presented publicly. So one large example of that was last September, um, a project for $235 million in capital improvements to Santa Rita Jail was presented to the Board of Supervisors and was approved by the board. And that did not happen as part of the annual budget process. It was not part of either the budget that was presented or approved last spring. Another area, as the supervisor mentioned, is Measure W funds, a sales tax that is dedicated mostly to housing as well as safety net costs. And that has a separate decision-making process outside of the annual budget process. So there are some things that can be funded through Measure W funds that will not be in the annual budget that is being presented to the board, which is really important. Also, there are adjustments that are made to the board approved departmental budgets throughout the year. That can be because of new revenues, grants. It can be from unexpected expenses. And those generally come before the board in piecemeal, right? It could be a new contract, and those are made throughout the year. Um, so what the actual spending or actual revenues for any of the county departments is at the end might look a little bit different. And finally, there are contracts that come before the board that are implementing those budget decisions. And those are also they come before the board. There are labor contracts with agency staff that are also board approved. Um, and this is where the terms and the scope of what the county is funding are, or at least can be deliberated. So, for example, yesterday, Tuesday, the board approved two multi-year contract extensions with companies that provide food and telecommunications services for people who are incarcerated in the county Santa Rita jail. And these were multi-year extensions. Often contracts are multi-year, and that is something that occurs. It's within the approved budget, but there's substance in those contracts that is not discussed or revealed or even known sometimes in the annual budget process. So if we can go to the next one. Next slide, please. So this is a graph that shows on the one hand, what is in blue is the budget for the sheriff's and behavioral health's jail. It's the jail budget. So uh, this is the cost of running the jail of Santa Rita Jail since 2008. So over the last 18 years. And you can see that the number of the budget has gone up considerably. In the first few of these years, it was fairly stable. It started to grow around 2012. Um, the growth that you see in the middle there, that's labeled Babu settlement, was because in 2020, the county settled a lawsuit for the lack of for the problems for people with mental illness in Santa Rita Jail that resulted in an agreement to provide and budget for more than 450 new staff in the jail, primarily from the sheriff's budget, primarily sworn deputies. And so that's why, and this was phased in over a 3-year period. And that's why you see um, this growth in the amount of dollars going to the jail. But you also see during the whole same period, and this crosses over different DAs over the last 18 years, 3 different DAs, um, that the number of people in the jail has been steadily going down. So today, the population of the jail is less than a third of what it was at its peak 17 years ago. Um, and it's also important to note that the budget part here does not include the infrastructure upgrades. This is or the construction of the jail that I just mentioned earlier. This is independent of that. Um, Also important that of the jail population that you see in red going down, about 93% of those people are unsentenced. They have not been sentenced for a conviction. So they are principally people who are awaiting trial. And that's one of the highest percentages of any jail in the state. If we can go to the next slide, please. So here it's we're going to take a little bit of a look in very general terms, very demographic terms of who is in Santa Rita Jail. And of course, primarily it's the let's look at the incarcerated population. And this month, as I said, 93% of the 1,283 people who were there in the last week were unsentenced. Of those people, 81% are black or brown. This has been very consistent over the last many years. About 92% are men. Um, there are separate units for women. And then, of course, also in the jail are the staff who work there. So the sheriff staff are the bulk of those. There are 1,032 budgeted positions for the sheriff in the jail. Most of those are sworn deputies, but about 290 of them are vacant positions. They are not filled. Those positions, those people are not working in the jail, even though they are in the budget. So the sheriff's office has a policy of requiring overtime from the sheriff's staff who are working in the jail. And last year, that accounted for about $26 million. So there are budget savings from those vacancies. Um, and our contention in the Care First Coalition is that the Babu settlement should be revisited because the number of staff is highly budgeted. Those are vacant positions. The county is probably never going to fill those positions, and the jail population is going down, right? So the need for staff has actually gone down over the last 15 years. Um, and yet we have been, this county has been required to budget for those positions. There are also a little over 100 behavioral health positions that were required by the Babu settlement to increased number of behavioral health positions in the jail. There's also an outside provider, WellPath. There's a medical provider, at least through September of next year. And those staff are also working in the jail. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is, I hope this is not too confusing, but I wanted to just show that the number of people with significant mental illness who were in the jail has been pretty consistent. This is only over the last 2.5 years since these numbers have been counted. Um, but both in terms of raw numbers, as well as the percentage of the jail population, as the jail population has gone down, um, there is a persistent, about a quarter of the people in the jail um, are have a significant mental illness. In other words, it is easier sometimes to get treatment or attention if you go to the jail than out in the community. And this is where the Care First policy comes in, because the county has said it's better to provide care out in the community than in the jail. In the jail, you just can't get better in many respects. And so even though there is a Care First policy in place, the number of people with a significant mental illness in the jail is significant, and there are more of those people than there are beds, treatment beds in the county for people with a serious mental illness. And we can go to the next slide. Um, and the fact is that the cost of these outcomes is significantly different. With the declining jail population and the increased budget for the jail for running the jail, the cost of someone for per person in the jail per year is over $332,000. Um, in a very high level of care, which is Villa Fairmont, it's a subacute facility. Um, the cost is about 182 million. Sorry, 182,000. Um, Permanent supportive housing and full service partnerships are, permanent supportive housing is a form of housing for people who need services. Full service partnerships are wraparound services, both for people in the behavioral health population, and those are around 30 to 32,000 costs per year. So it is both less harmful, preventative, and of course, much less expensive to provide care out in the community. If we can go to the next slide. Um, so where does the money come from? In order to understand that, we have to be able to see what's in the budget. So I just provided this illustration of what information is provided in the budget that is presented to the public and to the Board of Supervisors, and the Board of Supervisors votes on in late June. So on the right-hand side, you can see what was presented last year for the jail, the sheriff's jail budget. So that includes um, a separate category for medical services. That's primarily that medical contract with WellPath. And then the rest of the sheriff's budget for staff and other services in the jail. And it's basically just their raw numbers. The previous year, on the left, I'm not going to read out all those things, but what they include is you can see how things have changed over time. You can see what the net county costs are for each of those things. You can see what the actual spending was versus what the budget was in previous years. You can see what the number of full-time employment, number of staff are over those years. And again, breaking it down between the medical services. And so we're hoping that the budget that is presented in late May and that will be available to the public and to the board is inclusive of what was provided in prior years so that you can really see, okay, because you can't make informed decisions. If you're the board, if you're a member of the public who are, sharing your opinion, you can't make those informed opinions or decisions if you don't have adequate information about really where things are coming from, how it's changing over time, and what the costs are. So I will leave it there, except I just want to note that there is uh, another forum on May 3rd that will be at Laney College from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. That will explore budgets and really have more participatory budgeting, particularly focused on housing. And I will put the registration information in the chat.
Thank you so much, John, for that deep dive into the public protection budget and some of the work that you and a broader coalition do around Care First Jails Last, which is a set of recommendations around providing more care in the community versus in our jails. And thank you also, Agnes, on my staff team for doing an overview of the county budget. I hope you all have been learning a little bit more than you started with. I'm just going to briefly go over the budget process timeline, and then we're going to start answering some questions. Okay, so here you will see the county budget timeline. Somebody asked in the Q&A, who has authority over making decisions regarding the budget process? So our county administrator proposes the budget process every year. That usually happens in December. Last December, because of the advocacy we had done about improving transparency in the budget process and me pushing for more than 2 weeks as a new board member to review the proposed budget and make decisions on it, she did agree to propose the budget earlier. So that was a big victory. And, that also required me working with her around what it would mean to cut that timeline for the staff's budget preparation by 2 weeks. So, this is all a work in progress. I will continue to advocate together with all of you, with our county supervisor and with the board, because all of our policies take at least a majority vote, which is 3 out of 5 members. Sometimes the budget allocations require 4 out of 5 board votes. So you'll see here that the budget process on the staff side starts in January after the board approves the process and timeline in December. April 14th is when we had our early budget work session, and that's where our county agencies all provided a brief presentation on what they call the maintenance of effort budget. You heard from Agnes, that is the budget that allows us to continue the same level of services. This afternoon at 3:30, we had another budget work session, which is also recorded. So we'll have other budget work groups that include our president and vice president, as well as county staff and the community. We often have someone from the state to talk about the state budget and how that impacts us. And really, between now and when the budget is proposed by the administrator, our staff is going to be identifying what the budget gap is, because oftentimes revenue is not enough to cover expenses, and how to cover that shortfall. So we're anticipating that on May 28th at that board meeting, our county administrator will present a draft balanced budget. When that becomes public, I'm planning to do another budget town hall so that we can share that and get your input. And then towards the end of June, the week of June 23rd, we are tentatively planning to have our budget hearings. It starts with usually a Monday for a public budget hearing, hearing your public comments on the proposed budget, the board's deliberations on a Tuesday, and then the adoption on a Thursday. So in a nutshell, that is what things look like. We also heard from people as they registered asking, how can I get information about the board's process? I'll share some of that and we'll make sure that we email it to you along with the slides and the presentation. So definitely follow me on social media and sign up for my newsletter if you are not already doing that. Before each of our board meetings, usually on the weekend, I'll do a social media post about what's coming to the board. Our newsletter comes out every month. That's a good recap on what has happened over the past month and what's coming in the future. And we have a board meeting webpage that is also very helpful in terms of seeing the agendas for our board meetings, how you can join, as well as the recordings. You can also email our clerk to get email announcements for our board meetings, and that is cbs@acgov.org. And again, we're going to email all of this information to you. There's also a budget website that has all of our documents, which we'll email to you. And then our clerk also has a web page where you can send comments online that will go to all of us on the board. So that's a little bit about how you can participate. And I see that my staff person, Brianna, who's our Director of Community Engagement, is putting some of those links in the chat. Thank you, Brianna. I also want to share that I really believe in collaborative governance. I do work very closely with groups like John's organization and the Care First Jails Last Coalition. They're doing work on the ground that really helps to inform my work as your supervisor. I think some of you are with some of our healthcare collaboratives, our behavioral health collaboratives. There are homeless advocacy organizations and coalitions that we work with. Connecting with an issue-focused advocacy organization is also a good way to participate in this process. And then before we get to your questions, this slide talks a little bit about how to get more involved. So you can review the maintenance of effort budgets. Earlier this month, we had each of our departments go through a brief presentation similar to what Agnes did, but a little longer, so you can see information about agencies that you might be interested in. You can get to know your supervisor if you don't already. There's a link on my website to the district map. You just put in your address and you find out who your supervisor is. And please, engage us, share comments. All of us have web pages. And some of the particular supervisor meetings to pay attention to include next Tuesday afternoon, we will have a board work session. We're going to talk about a number of things, and that also includes Measure W and specifically the Essential Services Fund. So that's the 20% of Measure W that we set aside for things like healthcare, behavioral health, homelessness, food security. We're really looking forward to hearing more feedback from you in terms of how we can use those funds during what will be a challenging budget cycle. And then again, you saw this on the timeline, May 28th is tentatively when the administrator will propose a ballot budget. And the week of June 30th is when we are going to be doing public budget meetings. And again, I am planning to do another budget webinar or town hall in between and around the middle of June so that we can share that information with you and hear your feedback. And then finally, I wanted to say it's really important to participate in the electoral process. As I mentioned earlier, part of the reason we're in this challenge is because of the federal budget. And the board has officially supported the billionaire's tax, which is out gathering signatures to place on the November ballot. If successful, that would raise $100 billion to help support our healthcare and education systems. We are also doing advocacy at the state level. There is an ask to the state legislature to help support our public healthcare system with $500 million. So those are some of the things that we can do to get involved. And at this point, we'd like to take more of your questions. It looks like more of you might be putting some into the Q&A, and I know my staff has answered some of them. Agnes, feel free to jump in if you'd like me to answer anything live. But through the registration, a number of you sent questions. So I'll just go through some of these as you're thinking about questions you might have and sharing them with us. So the first question I've got is how are budget priorities determined, in particular in a difficult fiscal climate? Again, as we talked about earlier, the budget process includes our departments, our agencies proposing a maintenance of effort budget and determining their priorities. We have board meetings, we have work sessions, we engage with service providers and community organizations. All of that helps to inform our priorities and advocacy. And I want to also lift up that in addition to the board meetings and work sessions, I chair a meeting every month called Alameda County Together for All. That's where we are focusing in on issues ranging from immigrant protections to food security. So that's another place where you can engage myself and other supervisors to let us know what your priorities are. So that the community engagement, including of service providers and advocacy organizations, community organizations, is really important because we rely on those of you who are in the on the ground, meeting people's needs to help inform our priorities. Let's see, I've got another question here, which is how is Alameda County responding to federal budget cuts impacting our healthcare and housing resources, knowing that Measure W can't solve it all? So we are working to strategize with and support organizations that are getting funding cuts to tap into alternative revenue sources. So a few examples of this. You heard earlier about how California's Prop 1 transition is impacting our behavioral health organizations who are facing huge reductions and budget cuts. We are working with them on Medi-Cal billing, making sure that there's even more capacity to bill and get reimbursed for the services that are provided. Eliza Cosme, who's our office's Director of Community Partnerships, is convening a food sovereignty roundtable. So we've been working very closely with food organizations around meeting needs. And during the federal government shutdown last fall, we raised $2 million in private funds to help meet some immediate needs. We're continuing to strategize with that group around priorities, as well as whether we can identify any additional funding sources outside of the county. I also want to say again that this is a time, it's definitely a crisis. So not only tapping into Measure W, but possibly tapping into the Measure W reserve funds and looking at other reserve funds. So just like last year, I have asked the county administrator to ensure that our county auditor does a review of our reserve funds and talks with us as a board, as well as the public, around what are the balances and what are the guidelines for use of those funds, and what would it take for the board to vote to reallocate funds from our reserves into meeting some of the basic needs that our communities have. In addition to some of the advocacy I talked about, the state advocacy, there's also ongoing advocacy for years around closing the Prop 13 loophole. That would dramatically help fund public education, for example, and county and city services. I know a lot of you who work on healthcare issues are also advocating for single payer healthcare. There's also more structural reforms that we are working on so that, um, we're really making sure that the resources that we do have are going towards those services that people need the most. And that those who have wealth, whether it's large corporations or individuals with wealth, that everyone is paying their fair share. Okay, there's a couple more questions I'll go through. Are there any plans to supplement permanent supportive housing programs if federal funding becomes contested or unavailable? So Measure W's Home Together Fund, which supports homelessness and housing, our staff has set aside $30 to $60 million a year for permanent supportive housing in order to potentially backfill the funding that we get. So we are still waiting on some additional information to know exactly where we stand in terms of our funding gap, but we are looking ahead at some of the threats to make sure we prepare for them. Okay, there's another question about our county reserves. With so many essential services facing cuts, what is the decision-making process around accessing county reserves? I did talk about that a little bit. And again, we will try to use our social media in particular and also our email for those of you who registered to make sure that we let you know when these major budget meetings are happening because we will have a review of our reserves by our auditor, and that will go through again the balances, the criteria, and what's required in terms of a board vote, whether it's majority or 4/5 in order to access those reserves. And again, it's really important to contact your particular supervisor and all of the board members so that you can advocate for what you believe is important. Okay, I am just reading some of the questions that we got in advance. This one is really important. As Agnes mentioned, the board also supports our unincorporated communities. So for those communities that don't have their own local government, like a city council, for example, we support those communities by providing, things like infrastructure and public safety. So the question is, how is the budget for unincorporated communities being protected through resident input and oversight? So some of the programs the county offers is based on needs. So there are needs-based programs that are available to all of our county residents. And again, the general government services that are earmarked for unincorporated communities include the sheriff, public works, planning, housing, library services. We do have an unincorporated services committee where services and policies are discussed, and that is a committee that Supervisors Nate Miley and Lena Tam are members of. And then for those of you in the unincorporated areas, this includes Castro Valley, San Lorenzo, for example, among other communities. The county is looking at creating an office of unincorporated affairs that would help elevate residents' input on a number of these issues. So those are just some of the ways that we are engaging with the unincorporated communities. Okay, so to my staff, if you'd like to share any other questions besides the ones that I am responding to, please feel free. Okay, there's one more question I have. Somebody asked about the Coliseum development and specifically what strong community benefits will the supervisor demand for Coliseum redevelopment? And this is the Coliseum and the arena out in East Oakland. So the question is, what strong community benefits will the supervisor demand for Coliseum redevelopment to stand up interim and affordable housing? So, when I was on the Oakland City Council back in, I believe it was 2024, I fought for and won through a resolution a commitment that any future development that includes housing would have at least 25% set aside as affordable by deed restriction, as well as a commitment to the developers negotiating with the community additional community benefits. Here at the county, there is a lot of work that we're doing to potentially support no longer owning half of that parcel of land, but transitioning it to a potential developer who is interested in working with the community. And that's something we talk about almost every meeting. And certainly when there is significant news to share, I'll be sure to share that through our social media channels and newsletter. Okay, Agnes, are there any questions that you want to highlight that you've been monitoring through our Q&A?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. So we have one question that I think would be relevant to uplift here is we know that many immigrant residents, many undocumented residents, refugees, and asylum seekers are going to be losing healthcare coverage through HR 1 and state policy changes. Can you speak to what plans, any that the county has for our immigrant neighbors?
Yes, so this is something that we started working on last year. So last year we did allocate some of our Measure W essential services funds specifically to Medi-Cal enrollment outreach. So knowing that there was a deadline, December 31st, by which those with unsatisfactory immigration status had to enroll or re-enroll or potentially lose those benefits for good. The funding that we set aside as a board enabled us to work with the community and our healthcare agency and social services agency on very proactive community outreach. And so we have partnerships with a number of community organizations who are sort of trusted messengers in the community, who are from various communities, multilingual, that have been doing outreach. And that outreach has been not only through our community health organizations, but also through the media and other different channels. And so we will continue to do that type of outreach. And we are also staffing up to make sure we have enough caseworkers that can not only do the outreach with community organizations, but help answer people's questions and kind of take them through the process of figuring out their eligibility and enrolling or re-enrolling if that's what they have to do. And Agnes, feel free to add to that as well.
I would say that the county also has a responsibility for providing indigent care through our health pack program for people who are low income and uninsured. And that is healthcare coverage, not healthcare insurance, but healthcare coverage. So you can folks can get access to services through our network of federally qualified health centers and through our public hospital system at Alameda Health System. So that is another way that the county is looking into supporting those who are losing Medi-Cal coverage by beefing up support for our community clinics and hospitals. We also have one question around kind of MHSA and the BHSA transition. I think there are several of these questions around kind of the funding cuts This is something kind of gets a little technical and that we can share kind of offline with the folks who are asking those questions around kind of those funding cuts. Nikki, kind of, I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about kind of what that transition entails for folks who are asking, and we can also follow up offline for folks who have kind of more detailed questions around that transition and what that means for budget cuts.
Yeah, we are definitely working closely with a number of service providers to assess what it will mean. And, it does get a little technical, and we're happy to follow up with folks offline. One of the things I am really trying to engage folks around and listen to is, during a time when, our budget is going to be very challenging, who are the most vulnerable, who may not have access to care anymore. That includes folks who may be seriously mentally ill, folks who might be chronically homeless, other categories of people. I personally want to make sure that we are, doing our best to provide care to people who need it the most. That's part of our mandate as county government. And as you heard from John's presentation, we do have a significant budget, 6.1 billion. A good portion of that is general funds. Some of it we do have discretion to reallocate elsewhere. We have to make sure that we're spending our money effectively, that it's meeting the needs well, and that it's sustainable. So, this is the start of our budget process in terms of our engagement with the community. And I definitely want to continue to share information with you, hear your feedback, and definitely invite you to reach out to me and any of my staff to share, what's important to you.
And I think those were all of the questions that we received from the audience, both in the webinar today as well as in the registration form. So thank you everyone for attending. And I think before we go, we wanted to make one plug for other events that we have coming up that our office is organizing.
Okay, while Agnes is getting the flyer up, thank you. So, we are also hosting an emergency preparedness fair. It is Saturday the 2nd, 10 to 1 at the Emeryville Center for Community Life. This is in partnership with our fire department here at the county, the city of Emeryville, but everyone is invited to attend. One of the things that we are very concerned about is how climate change is impacting our communities. Everything from wildfires to very cold days, very hot days, heavy rain, all of that is impacting our communities. And we want to make sure that people have access to information for how to be prepared, as well as how to potentially respond if there is some type of emergency. So encourage everyone to attend. For folks who register, we're also going to enter you into a raffle to win tickets to see the Roots Soccer Club. So that is a fun time, and it's also an opportunity to connect with me, my staff person, Elisa Cosme, who's our director of community partnerships, who is working with me around wildfire issues in particular. So most of my staff will be out there, and we hope to see you that Saturday. Okay, thanks everyone for spending your evening with us. And rest assured, we will follow up with everybody who registered so that you've got everything that we shared, the video, the resources, and the meeting information in the future so that you can engage in our budget process. Have a good evening.